Sam Harris has not only made a fool of himself by talking about Christianity, a religion he knows little to nothing about, but he has also said things like this. If I could wave a magic wand and get rid of religion or rape, I would get rid of religion. All I can tell you is keep magic wands far, far away from Sam. He also said this, some propositions are so dangerous that it may even be ethical to kill people for believing them. Well, Sam has argued in the past that the God of the Old Testament is an evil, maniacal, bloodthirsty warmonger, and apparently Sam wants to be just like his Heavenly Father. Of course, that isn't true, but Sam has been wrong about a lot more than just that.
Something like, airborne Ebola, no one gets to make that choice anymore. I mean, then literally the cops come in and vaccinate you.
It looks as though the atheist claim to being moral is also incredibly flawed. And his recent words about Elon Musk put this on full display. So the question remains, do we need God to be moral? I want to answer that question today on Indie Thinker. Before I do that, welcome to the show. My name is Reed Huberman. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Today I want to give a Christian response to cultural events, because I believe we're living in an age of unparalleled bad ideas, and the only cure for bad ideas are good ideas, and I believe the best ideas are found in Scripture. I'll try to justify that today, especially as it pertains to claims of moral objectivity. Before I do that, I want to make sure that you know that today's show is sponsored by our friends over at Sweet and Savory. If you're looking for a fantastic online or in-person cooking classroom experience, you need to check these guys out. The owner, Jeff, is a personal friend of mine, and he thinks he looks like me. And I hate to reward that kind of bad behavior, but I do know this. They're such great people, and they care about the values you care about, so you should support them. In order to do that, you need to go to sweetandsavoryclassroom.com, where you can see a list of all the online classes they have to offer and the in-person cooking classroom experiences that you can enjoy, where you will learn to cook some of the most amazing food. So again, go to sweetandsavoryclassroom.com, and when you check out, make sure to use the promo code IndieThinker. Now, Sam's recent comments about Elon Musk are so deplorable and unthinking, I thought they were worth mentioning. Here's some of Sam's comments on Elon Musk.
Not say that someone like Elon Musk is an intellectual. When you're talking about somebody like Elon, you're talking about somebody who never internalized anything as a standard of ethical or intellectual integrity.
I don't even know how he knows this, but so you cannot think of Elon Musk as an intellectual, the guy that's shooting rockets into outer space. Now, I know he's got a bunch of people working for him, and he's not the most intelligent guy, but even the most intelligent people surround themselves with the most intelligent people. So there might be some aspect of intelligence there. Now, forgive me if I can't make a little bit of a whimsical and good-natured, at least I think, kind of observation here. Sam is also the guy that wants to deny any aspect of intelligence in design. And the fact that we have genetic code that sure seems to mimic language, which doesn't happen without a mind. So the fact that Sam can't see intelligence might have more to do with his intelligence, or at least his presuppositions, because I don't think he is an unintelligent man, but I do think he has presuppositions that weigh in on everything that he says, not only when it comes to God, but also as he's continuing to talk about Elon here. Can we at least just make the assessment that you are not a fool if you have one of the biggest car companies, one of the most prominent rocket ship companies, or any of the other things that Elon has done? You can't purely dismiss the guy as somebody who is unintelligent if you've done all of that. That came from somewhere, and unless you're going to go the route of socialism and just pretend that the only way that you can get ahead in life is from stealing from the proletariat, then you might have to suggest something other than this perfectly nonsensical assumption from Sam, which is that actually Elon is a pretty smart guy, and Sam, you sound like an idiot.
Got hammered into him as during his adventures in tech, and now, and in his case, perhaps more conspicuously than any other, we're seeing the total derangement of a personality based on social media addiction. I mean, that is in fact what you see with Elon. Okay. He is a Twitter addict.
Listen, I got to tell you, I do object to this in the sense that we have heard Sam talk about the government forcing vaccines on people, and that it might be a really good conversation to have, that if the vaccines were to truly help us at a time where undeniably the mortality rate is much higher than it was with COVID, that we might have to have a really substantial moral conversation as to whether or not it is absolutely permissible for the government to come in and force people to take those vaccines. The problem I have with this is that, one, it's a really big question as to whether or not that is certainly the best way to go about helping people, even in the case of a time where there is a deadly disease, more deadly than COVID. Does that really bring about the best results? I guess would be my argument to Sam. But beyond that, I would also say, Sam, you don't see clearly the problem here? You don't see the issue with demanding that people take a vaccine and that the government force that upon people at all? You are such a believer in science that you're willing to, I don't know, put blind faith in science? Wait a second. I thought religion is belief in the absence of evidence. We're just blind faith asserting things here. But apparently atheism is blind faith assertions where logic does not support your conclusions. Now, I will go as far as to tell you, if you didn't already know, that Christianity actually is not belief in the absence of evidence, but it's evidence that points to a conclusion. All of the evidence, for those who have actually investigated this with any kind of, I would say, responsibility, find themselves oddly looking at the things that seem like design out in the universe, the fact that we are in a privileged position for life to subsist here on Earth. We sure seem oddly designed in that we are thinking and rational human beings, and rational human beings with a conscience don't come from non-rational mechanical processes like natural selection. We could talk about the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, which I just mentioned. We could talk about the moral argument, which we will in a moment. The fact that you don't really get objective moral values from atheism. And then all the atheist has to say when Christians bring up this fact that atheism doesn't actually posit any kind of moral framework whatsoever, they say, oh, well, atheism is just non-belief in God, as though it doesn't come front-loaded with a bunch of the presuppositions we just heard from Sam. So forgive me if I don't believe that this is purely a rational rant. One more thing.
In his case, perhaps more conspicuously than any other, we're seeing the total derangement of a personality based on social media addiction. I mean, that is in fact what you see with Elon. He is a Twitter addict, so much so that he felt he needed to buy the platform, and now he has this free speech evangelist gloss on what he's up to. But really, what he's up to is, snorting ketamine and tweeting at all hours of the day and night, right? And this is.
All right, you can call me an Elon apologist if you want, but I think that this is just a vile attack against this man. And a man who has done nothing but try to bring fiscal responsibility to the federal government. I mean, if Elon Musk wasn't siding with Trump, the man who was truly deranged in this situation, Sam Harris, would have nothing bad to say about Elon whatsoever. In fact, Elon isn't even a Christian, so me defending him isn't for that purpose. Sam would find more kinship in terms of belief system with Elon than he ever would me. What I simply want to point out with this video is that Sam oddly jumps into this kind of ad hominem attack because atheism ultimately leads you to that. Now, Sam has done this with Christianity in the past, but he also naturally has to do that with anything when it pertains to atheism. What has he done? Okay, so what he's done is he has gone to ad hominem. He has rejected the carrot at all and just simply gone with the stick, because atheism doesn't really have a carrot at the end of the day. There is no real benefit to atheism, so the only thing that you can do is reduce yourself to personal attack and try to make the other person in the scenario seem obviously ridiculous for believing what they believe. Now, this is what new atheists like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins have done with Christianity forever.
Mock them, ridicule them. In public.
They have had to quickly jump into the offensive because they know that their ideas are perfectly indefensible, that atheism doesn't actually provide anything good for society. The only thing objectively that it's done is bring about the bloodiest century in human history, and compared to all other centuries before it in total. So atheism is so bankrupt, so devoid of moral understanding, so devoid of anything valuable for society that they have to jump into this kind of ad hominem attack. And I've seen it before with Christianity, and we see it here on display with Elon. And what I would argue is just simply this: you inevitably have to act like this when you do not have a theistic worldview, and in particular, I would argue a biblical / Judeo-Christian worldview, that ultimately you do not have the prerequisite grounding for a belief in objective morality. Therefore, you can talk this way about other people and never think twice about it. Ultimately, what I'm arguing is just this, is that you can't get from is to ought under atheism. Therefore, atheists cannot ground their moral views in anything other than personal arbitrary preference, or in this case, personal arbitrary attacks against a person that you don't like because of Trump derangement syndrome. In other words, you can't get from is to ought without a transcendent set of moral values, and those are proper only to religion, not atheism. Now, let me be very clear here. Can an atheist be moral? Yes. Can an atheist reason their way to moral values? Yes, but in order to do so, they have to borrow. They have to borrow from a worldview that is not proper to atheism. They have to posit a transcendent set of moral values, but they cannot tell you where those moral values come from. The Christian can. Going back to the is-ought problem, so people fully understand this, the is-ought idea is that you can't get to moral propositions simply by factual statements. In other words, naturalism is never going to lead you to objective moral values. And now, the humanists will come along and say after this, well, we don't believe in objective moral values, we just believe in consent and we believe in harm. Well, the problem is who actually gets to say what consent is and who actually gets to say what is actual harm. Let me give you a couple of propositions here. So meat eating, we can make a statement about meat eating. And we can say something like this. People have been eating meat for years. Therefore, people ought to eat meat. Now, if you're a vegan, you're going to have a real problem with that. And it doesn't necessarily follow. After all, if all life is valuable and life doesn't have a hierarchy of values based upon the fact that, I don't know, some beings are made in the image of God and others not, some beings have a conscience and others don't, and if you can't even tell me where that conscience comes from, then you might simply jump to the conclusion that, well, meat eating isn't properly right and we shouldn't eat other beings. You can also do this with kind of the animal kingdom in this way. Well, animals have relations with whatever they want to have relations with. And we shouldn't even be talking about consent. We should just look at reproduction as a brute reality, and we should all be reproducing with everything and anything. The moment you get to the age where you can actually reproduce, have at it. And there's some atheists, by the way, who would be very happy to make that argument. And that is because they can't get from is to ought. Let me get a little bit more extreme, as extreme as that last example was. Poison is bad, therefore you should not eat poison. Okay, that seems like a logical conclusion. Well, we got from is to ought there, didn't we? It is bad to eat poison, therefore you ought not eat poison, or drink it or whatever. And so, of course, the person who is consuming the poison might say, well, I don't want to live any longer. I despair of life, and life is harmful to me. Therefore, I don't want to live anymore. Therefore, I am going to eat poison. Why is that bad? Tell me one reason why I shouldn't do that. And of course, what will be the response to that? Who are you to tell me not to eat poison? Because you cannot get from is to ought. And for those who think some of my analogies here might even be lacking or simply straw mans, let me just remind you that since David Hume posited the is-ought problem, no atheist has actually been able to solve it. And this is why I think atheists like Sam Harris have to make perfectly irrational ad hominem attacks against people like Elon Musk without blinking an eye as to whether or not what they're saying is good, permissible, or moral. Because atheists can't actually properly justify moralism or root it within their framework. Which is why I think ultimately the answer to the question, can an atheist be moral, is no. Because I think the real answer is, can a Christian be moral? No. Just because you say you're a Christian doesn't mean anything, and it doesn't mean that you'll do what's right all the time. The only one that can is a good and perfect, non-contingent being like God. So let me be really clear. Sam's problem is not that he hates Elon Musk, because hatred in and of itself isn't the problem. If you are a good person, there are some things you should hate. The problem is that Elon is doing good things and Sam hates him because Sam has no understanding of what the good actually is from atheism. Jesus said it this way when he was called a good teacher. He said, "Nobody is good but God." Now be careful, because Jesus doesn't say, "and I'm not God" there. He's just simply making an assertion that you cannot even understand what good is if you don't properly situate God in your life to begin with, which is the ultimate good. Jean-Paul Sartre said it this way, that if there is not an infinite reference point, then finite beings do not find meaning. That means that there must be a standard of deviation, a standard by which we understand when things deviate. So you must know the standard for good, and then when that is not reached, the deviation will be the bad. But if you never know where you can root the standard, or if it's only rooted in personal arbitrary preferences, you don't really have a standard. You just have a hypothetical idea. And so for that reason, atheists, by dint of their worldview, cannot truly be moral people, because they cannot root a understanding of morality in a transcendent good outside of themselves. So do you need God to be good? Well, you need God in the sense that there is no such thing as the good without God. But that doesn't mean that you have to be a believer to do good things or to see good things, because God, even in His grace, gives even people like Sam Harris the opportunity to repent and see the error of their ways. All right, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And if you found this episode meaningful, you will love becoming a member over at indiethinker.org/support, where you can gain access to exclusives like ebooks, audiobooks, documentaries, and so much more. Don't forget to check out the sponsors of this show down below in the description of this podcast. But most importantly, go with God.